Okay, welcome back everyone. Can I ask you to take your seats? I think we're going to get going again. We're nearly there. Thanks for staying with us. Hope it's been a useful day. I know it's been a long day. But I think we should probably get going just to have the best chance of finishing as close to 4 o'clock as we can. So welcome back. Hope you're feeling refreshed. We're now going to move into our final session on de-risking in respect of pre-consent surveys. And Graham Motes, who's our lead in this area, actually recently recorded a video right down here in Swansea, which is going to tell you more about this programme. We'll go into that now. So Graham, over to you.
It was here last summer in the port of Swansea where we mobilised our first geophysics vessel. This was an important milestone for the Crown Estate because it represented our ambition to contribute to survey data acquisition. Survey crews worked for a number of months in a unique summer period with some very challenging weather conditions, and supply those data sets to successful bidders in the leasing process for floating offshore wind in the Celtic Sea. High quality data set has been acquired and is being processed by Fugro's survey teams in their processing offices. Looking ahead to this summer, we have 2 geophysics vessels returning to ensure we complete the geophysics programme. In addition, we have a geotechnical vessel coming to undertake a shallow geotechnical programme. We have also begun acquiring bird and marine mammal survey data with our contractor HiDef. Aircraft have flown several times over the Celtic Sea area, with a focus, of course, on the project development areas. All of these surveys represent months of planning and preparation by listening to you, the developers, and engaging with marine stakeholders, including statutory nature conservation bodies. The Crown Estate have made significant investment in these surveys, and our goal is to acquire a number of high-quality, useful data sets to assist you, the developer, in de-risking early design and to contribute to the consenting process. Now let's take a look at some of the technical aspects of the survey works. In respect to the geophysics survey, we have acquired 24% of the data sets. We've undertaken these works in English waters in PDA 2 and PDA 3. We're running with the usual survey sensors, and in realisation of the geological conditions, we have run not only a sub-bottom profiler system to target those upper 10 to 15 metres, depending on soft, shallow soils, as well as the sub-bottom profiling system. We have been using 2D ultra-high-res seismic spread to enable data acquisition down to 50 metres or target of 50 metres below seabed. This will enable you, the developers, to understand significantly where rock is below seabed. From the geotechnical platform, we will be acquiring soils information across 80 locations throughout the 3 project development areas by using a 6-metre vibrocorer and a 200 kilonewton cone penetrometer testing system. The digital aerial surveys have commenced. We're flying at a height of 550 metres, and that's after careful consideration and feedback from statutory nature conservation bodies. This will enable repeat surveys to be undertaken not only during construction but also during the operation of the wind farm, and an ongoing comparison made with data sets through time. We're flying at 2 GSD, ground surface distance, and we're flying with a 6-kilometre buffer zone. The meditation spreads are at Pembroke, and we're getting ready to deploy those equipments. A standard spread, as you would expect, FLIDAR, acoustic Doppler current profiler and a wave rider buoy. The FLIDAR will be targeting from 0 to approximately 300 metres above water level. Each project development area will have its own suite of meditation equipment. We've also included a passive acoustic monitoring device to provide a little bit more information on marine mammal activity, and we've also included a turbidity sensor at near seabed. I'm sure by now you have a sense of the amount of work that has gone into the planning and preparation for the performance of these surveys. We want Round 5 floating offshore wind in the Celtic Sea to be a resounding international success story for now and for future generations.
Thanks, Graham. Graham's going to be on the panel a bit later for your questions. So just on that, we're a little bit behind schedule, so we'll just close. I think if you can get questions into Slido by 3:15 on the de-risking sections, that will allow us to consider them and just bring them into the final Q&A. Next up, we're going to talk a bit about ports and floating offshore wind. I'm delighted to introduce Colin Hudson from the UK Investment Bank. As you may be aware, UKIB have a focus on investing to support both economic and net zero policy objectives, and port infrastructure for floating wind is an identified priority sector. Colin's Managing Director of Banking and Investments for UKIB, and is here to introduce their work and present his perspective on this all-important topic. Colin.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here in Swansea to say a few words about the UK Infrastructure Bank and how we are available for and looking to support the Crown Estate's leasing Round 5. As just explained, I'm Colin Hudson. I'm a Managing Director at UKIB. I joined the bank just under a year ago. Previously, I was at Siemens Bank running their project finance debt team, which covered the UK, Middle East, and Africa, and that was a continuation of a multi-decade, multi-generational, it seems sometimes, career in project finance debt and advisory. The UK Infrastructure Bank was set up just over 2 years ago. It's Treasury-owned, but we're operationally independent, and we're headquartered in Leeds, although we are setting up satellite offices in the devolved nations, front and centre Cardiff, but also Belfast and Edinburgh, and we also have a London office too. We aim to work with the private sector and local authorities to increase investment in UK infrastructure. Our key objectives, our two axiomatic principles, are to tackle climate change and take forward the government's zero carbon transition agenda for 2050, and also to engender regional and local economic growth, jobs and productivity. We have three principles, three key bottom lines, if you like. We focus on infrastructure. We're not an investment bank. We're not a corporate bank. We are there to invest in infrastructure assets, infrastructure networks, and the technology which underpins those assets and networks. We're here to make a positive financial return. We can provide subsidized finance, but it's not our mainstream, if you like. It's not meant to be our main focus of activity. And we're also seeking very much to bring in additional sources of private sector finance into the projects, the opportunities we look at. We're not here to compete with existing debt and equity providers. We're very much here to be a facilitator to them. Treasury's allocated us £22 billion, £8 billion of debt and equity on my side of the bank, the banking and investment side, looking to cooperate and partner with private sector organizations. We've also been given £10 billion worth of guarantees where we wrap, we guarantee, we risk share with predominantly private sector debt sources of capital. And we very recently closed, just before Christmas, our first significant private sector guarantee, where we wrapped just under a quarter of £1 billion worth of fibre rollout financing. And in addition, we have our local authority team who are looking to lend to bespoke projects in line with our objectives, which are being taken forwards by local authorities at rates which are competitive in the context of the Public Works Loan Board financing. We have 5 priority sectors. We're focused on clean energy. Clean energy for us is not just energy generation, but also includes storage, carbon capture, utilization and storage, transmission and distribution, and the supply chain associated with energy generation. We also focus on transport with a very significant focus on port infrastructure. The port subsector is the largest part of our transportation portfolio. In addition, we look at EV charging, rolling stock, e-buses, etc. But ports remain our key focus. 3 other sectors where we're active are waste, water, and digital, particularly fibre rollout. We have, within our 5 priority sectors, identified those sectors which are more nascent, which are in need perhaps of investment to facilitate acceleration. And within that constellation of subsectors, floating offshore wind and port supporting infrastructure is very much front and center. We have other core sectors, and for all of those, in the autumn of last year, we published a series of sector strategy papers, and when you get the slides after the conference, and you click on that QR code, you should be able to access those papers. One of the great things about working at UKIB is our very broad range of financial products. We can do senior debt, we can guarantee senior debt, we can provide mezzanine finance, we can provide common equity, preferred equity, convertible loan notes. We have a full quiver of arrows to help support the projects which require our additionality and problem solving. To date, in the banking and investment side, sort of my side of the bank, we've concluded 23 projects, 23 financings in the sectors that we look at, and those projects have encompassed just over £2 billion, and very much have encompassed the full range of those products. Our minimum ticket size is £25 million. We can lend up to £500 million for the appropriate opportunity, which meets our sort of concentration criteria in terms of credit risk, which very much is defined and mapped onto credit rating. So effectively, if the opportunity is adjudged internally to be investment grade rated, then we can go up to £500 million. As touched on, supporting floating offshore wind and associated infrastructure is, we see, a key part of our mandate. We have already, as I said, invested significantly in port finance this year. We concluded a £50 million loan to the Port of Tyne to enable, amongst other things, the development of that port to service offshore wind. And one of the first deals which my colleagues on the local authority side did was a £107 million financing to Teesport, again, to help facilitate that port in its supporting activities for floating offshore wind. Our pipeline is very heavily populated with port opportunities, and amongst those, a number of opportunities which revolve around supporting floating offshore wind. And indeed, 1 or 2 of those are very far advanced, and hopefully we'll be moving them through the final stages of our credit process in the next few weeks. As set out in our sector strategy paper for floating offshore wind and ports, we are looking to work with developers, port operators, and other stakeholders to lean into the key risks and constraints associated with investment in floating offshore wind supporting port infrastructure to enable the fabrication, integration, and transit of floating offshore wind assets in advance of definitive revenue certainty for those ports. Flow projects, specifically with regard to flow, we are able to look at the full range of our finance products and also look to lean into earlier stage risks, if you like, in assembling the supply chain for floating offshore wind projects. And we're very aware of the uncertainties which are inevitable, if you like, in terms of the gap between undertaking significant supply chain expenditure and crystallizing revenue at a relatively late stage in the development process. And we're very keen to help assume and lean into that risk spectrum as well. Finally, one point to note, Wales has been a very important location for UKIB's investment activity since we started. One of the first loans we wrote was to provide debt finance to what at the time was the country's largest solar farm near Newport. We've also been active in financing fibre network rollout in the country. And my colleagues on the local authority side are very busy looking at opportunities around flood protection and coastal erosion protection. Just looking at a few of our tombstones of activity. In this slide on the far right, you see the activity we've had on the port side, amongst the constituency, the constellation of other deals we've done in the past 2 years. And finally, just to conclude, contact details for myself and my colleagues who are directors within our bank who are responsible for the various subsectors which touch most notably upon floating offshore wind and ports. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thanks, Colin. Such an important topic, and pretty exciting actually to think about what might happen in the coming years as we get floating wind into the water. So we're going to go into our last speaking slot now, when we'll hear directly from representatives of UK and Welsh Government and from industry. So delighted to introduce Nicola Higgins, who's Offshore Wind Programme Director, the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, Ed Sheriff, who's Deputy Director for Energy at the Welsh Government, and Jane Cooper, who's Director of Offshore Wind at Renewable UK, and our External Affairs Director, Mary Thorogood, is going to guide us through this discussion before we then go into the final Q&A. Thank you. Over to you, Mary.
Great. Thanks very much, Johnny. So we spent a lot of time talking today about the huge opportunity that's in front of us all here in this room. And I think, obviously, we spent a lot of time talking about the Crown Estate's role and the role we'll play through the leasing process. But of course, as they say, it does take a village. We've heard from UKIB, ESO, and of course, governments and industry have a huge role to play in helping us to realise that opportunity as well. So a short moment today before we get you to Q&A and hopefully on your way to take a step bit outside the leasing process and hear from the government's and industry perspective on where we are today and actually some of the challenges, opportunities, and probably what keeps them awake a little bit at night as well. So I think I'll probably turn to Ed first. We're on your home patch, Ed, so probably we should give you first privilege. We heard the First Minister and the Minister this morning talk really inspiringly about the opportunity for a just transition that the floating wind opportunity brings, and particularly in the skills agenda as well. Could you sort of say a few words about sort of more what that looks like in practice? Just transition sounds like a really nice word, but what's some of the actions Welsh Government are taking?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to be on this panel. Really demonstrates the partnership work in the Crown Estate have done with government and industry to deliver on this vision. So, first of all, it's a really exciting opportunity from a climate change perspective, trying to support our net zero ambitions, our renewable targets, and offshore wind contributes a significant part of that. But Net Zero Wales is more than just climate. It's about supporting that just transition. So we have this net zero society. We want all elements of society to benefit from that. So that's a key theme that runs through Net Zero Wales. And last year we published a just transition framework, which really builds on some of that. And I think from the perspective of the work we're talking about today, it comprises of 3 key elements, really. It's about ensuring that industry and businesses are fit for the future, to be thriving into the future, to support the economy and the jobs that we want in our society. It's ensuring that the current and future generations have the skills that we need for the workforce to provide the jobs and meet those requirements locally as well. And then third, it's about addressing inequality in our communities as well, and making sure that we have thriving communities around this investment opportunity. So we're doing an awful lot of work on the skills side, which is really important, trying to address the skills gaps that we need, build on the really good work that we have in Wales. Pembrokeshire College is a really good example of some of the work we're doing with skills and industry to make sure we've got the workforce for the future, but really expand on that and roll that out wider so more of the jobs that we need are met locally with a skilled workforce. And then I think the other bit then is just around the supply chain. So we've been involved in a lot of the great work that OIC have done, that Renewables UK have done on the task force for floating offshore wind, about what those opportunities are. And it's really about bringing our local intelligence and the local information that we have on businesses in Wales to make sure that we've got those opportunities mapped and identified so that we've got that growth potential locally within Wales, which will support those future generations, the jobs that we want, and provide that route for the skilled workforces to go into in Wales. So that's our ambition around that just transition and why we're so excited about this opportunity.
Fantastic, and I think for everybody that excitement has really come over during today as well, so perhaps we'll come back to some of the points you raised there. Nicola, how does this look from, where does UK government play and what are some of the actions you're taking that can dovetail with what's happening in Wales?
Yeah, well, thank you. And firstly, thanks. It's great to be on this panel with colleagues from the Welsh Government, from the Crown Estate and industry, which I think shows the huge amount of collaboration that's ongoing in this space to drive forward the leading position that the UK has on floating offshore wind. And obviously, the government wants to push that forward and sees floating offshore wind as key to its meeting its energy security and net zero ambitions, and also wanting to get the benefits of the green economy, including the supply chain, from that. So I think we're really supportive, given all that, obviously, of where we are today and the Crown Estate's leasing round 5. As Gus noted, and many others have also noted throughout the day, this isn't just it. We're also working very closely with the Crown Estate on the future pipeline and the announcement that we're working on another 12 gigawatts over the 2030s, in addition to the 4.5 gigawatts that's being offered up in leasing round 5. I think some of the areas where there's synergy, we're really pleased with the strategic approach the Crown Estate have taken to this leasing round, particularly on grids and the environment. And there's a lot of work going on strategic planning in government, announced a strategic spatial energy plan, and also working very closely with DEFRA to address environmental consenting, speed up offshore wind, while also making space for environmental improvements. And then in terms of sort of port and supply chain, obviously we need the ports floating offshore wind. We've got the FlowMIS scheme that will provide support for infrastructure for floating offshore wind. We've recently announced the Green Industries Growth Accelerator, which puts 960 million for clean energy manufacturing, including offshore wind and networks. We've also just closed the consultation on sustainable industry rewards, setting out how those would help some of the challenges around the supply chain in terms of pressure on economic, environmental and social sustainability, which is another theme that's come up a lot today. We also obviously have contracts for difference allocation round 6 due to launch in March with the administrative strike price having been announced a couple of months ago at more than 50% higher for AR5. So that's providing the secure route to market that the floating offshore wind industry will need. So that's sort of a quick whiz through some of the things we're doing, and look forward to the discussion and the continuing collaboration on this as we move forward.
Brilliant. Thanks to you both. Jane, it all sounds great. Welsh Government, UK Government, between them seem to have sorted it all. What are you hearing from your members? Is this working seamlessly and as collaboratively, or is there more we can do?
Well, I think there's always more, isn't there? I'm afraid. Because the more you collaborate, the more you get to the harder conversations, and you build the trust, you have those harder conversations. And I think that actually we've had some quite difficult conversations, and I think that's good, because it probably means we're getting to the root of some of the issues. But I think, having worked at developer as well, really developers want to build offshore wind farms, and they want to deliver green power, which is the government's ambition. It's the ambition across the UK, and ensuring the security of supply. And by doing that, you actually start to create the jobs and you bring the supply chain. So if the developers can't develop, we don't get the benefits that we all talk about. So this is really important, what's happening today. And whilst there's always going to be challenges and unknowns, industry is prepared to take some of the risk, a balance of risk. I think it's about making sure it's the right risk and understanding the process. And the process needs to be as certain as possible. And the timelines need to be clear, because I think it gives confidence. And it gives confidence where there's foreign investment or stakeholders. Once you get to projects of this size, there's a lot of stakeholders going up the tree. And I think if things are delivered when they say they're going to be delivered in the right time frame, it allows everything to come together in the right way, and it creates confidence, it builds confidence. And really, I mean, this is the bit, isn't it, about the supporting the certainty, and it's particularly around the grid, and it's particularly around the environment. And I know we've spoken at length about both of those today. So that's great, and we genuinely encourage the collaboration across the UK and the Welsh Government, and sort of like remaining mindful of the benefits across the Celtic region, which includes the southwest, which I'm not sure we've spoken about much today, but this is obviously across, we saw the map earlier, it's across sort of Cornwall, Dorset, Bristol. I come from Bath, so Bath. But it's across the whole of the region.
Yeah, exactly right. And we could have, equally have had this event in the southwest as well. And of course, be sure to be engaging with those communities there as well. And I'm conscious that the Minister talked about seamless collaboration this morning. I'm always conscious what it must look. There's many people in the room who'll be advising international investment boards and thinking about how to speak through the devolved differences back to their boards and make sure we can really bring the investment here. Nicola, how do you think we stack up? How do you think we stack up internationally? What are they saying about us?
Yeah, well, I'll cover two things there, because I think you covered sort of the devolved, central devolved administration, and also the how we stack up internationally. I mean, I think one of the things, being your sort of traditional civil servant, having worked across a whole range of industries, the collaboration in offshore wind is actually, is one of the most collaborative industries I've worked in. And, things like the Offshore Wind Industry Council, where we have the Crown Estate, we have industry, we have the Welsh Government, we also have the Scottish Government. We have that cross-government approach to, trying to drive forward the challenges, the opportunities, and overcome the challenges is key. I think internationally, the one thing the UK has, we have huge experience in offshore wind. We've got, after China, the second biggest fixed pipeline in the world. We've got the biggest floating offshore wind pipeline. This is going to add to that. We've got the first floating offshore wind farm. We've got one of the largest offshore wind farms. We've got a well-established route to market through the CFD. And I think that collaboration that we have in terms of, we know there's lots of challenges. We're working on grid, we're working on the environment. There will be more challenges as we go forward, and the more we can do that collaboration to work together to, overcome those from the various, pulling the various levers that we have, the better.
Great, thank you. And I think obviously Renewable UK and Renewable UK Cymru play a hugely important role in actually bringing those bodies together and making sure there is that collaboration and that seamless move through, be that consenting, be that grid or other structures as well. I want to talk quickly about the supply chain before I wrap up. I know, Ed, with Wales, there's a huge amount of the economy, 80 to 90% SME focus, and it's hugely important, as well as attracting the major manufacturing investment. We focus on the SMEs as well. What's some of the advice you can give developers in the room to really make sure they do engage with the SMEs when they're putting their bids together and then moving forward in the process?
Absolutely. I mean, that's something that we're really trying to encourage through this kind of mapping process that we've talked about, is that working from the top down in terms of what the gaps are, what the needs are of developers and industry, really coming up from the bottom with our business intelligence, the relationships that we have with businesses, SMEs, larger businesses as well in Wales, to really understand how we can meet those needs locally. And it might be a case of supporting collaboration between a number of SMEs. One does this bit, one does that together. Actually, they could address that gap in the market that we need. So I think really, through the process that we're doing, really encourage developers to speak to us, come to our business and economy teams to really understand what's out there and how we can help you meet your local needs and your supply chain needs throughout all of your processes, because we've got a really excellent base here in Wales and really excellent opportunities to build on that and support those businesses to meet your needs. So just really encourage you to use the Welsh Government, use the networks that we have through Business Wales and our economy teams to help identify how we can support you to meet that locally.
Great stuff. And I can see Jane nodding away, so I can feel a plug for Renewable UK Cymru coming on, and some of the work they're doing there as well as through DESNES as well. I think I'm being asked to wrap up, and I'm really keen we give you some time for the Q&A. with the group. So I think we talked a lot about listening, engaging, all those items today, but I'm going to ask each of the panel for actually one action they're going to take away from what they've heard here, what they're actually going to go home and tomorrow morning really enact to accelerate the opportunity. And Jane, you're on the end. I'll come to you first.
I'm going to give you a call, Nicola. It's going to be about the environment, I'm afraid. I think that is we've got some ideas. We've really got to get that one moving, I think. Without that, we can't make the rest of it work. So I'll be calling you tomorrow morning.
Picking up the phone or on the train home. Nicola, what can you act on?
I'll answer Jane's call tomorrow morning when she calls me. I think joking aside, the dialogue, because we know there's issues with the environment, we know there's issues with grid. We're working, the government's working at pace on a lot of these things, as are other people. So I think keeping that dialogue going to make sure that we are moving forward in the best way to unblock barriers and to make the most of the opportunities.
Great stuff. And Ed, final word.
I'm going to bring it down to the communities, actually, because we've talked a lot about the jobs and the investment and the ports, but really it's about bringing communities with us as well and making sure that they're aware of what's going on in their region and supporting you developers and engaging with communities to bring those communities with us, because if they don't see the benefits, it's not going to be something that they're going to engage in or support. So let's work together to support that community action as well.
Great stuff. And I think the one action I'll take away is actually to keep talking, not only to those on the panel, but actually to everyone else in the room, to see what we can do to actually move much faster to get these projects into the water and generating as well. So thanks to all the panel, and I'll hand back to Johnny. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mary, Ed, Nicola, and Jane. I think that now does bring us to the final Q&A session. I believe Tim Stiven's going to moderate that from here. So if I could invite Tim and the panel members up to the stage. And then after this, Tim's going to hand over to Gus to wrap up. So from me, thanks everyone for staying with us and enjoy the Q&A.
Good stuff. Well, my friends, we're in the last lap. So let's see what we can do to support your understanding of some of the key issues in what we've called de-risking. So this is an opportunity to focus questions on HRA, on grid, and on the HRA. And we'll take it the same way that we did before. So thank you for submitting your questions on Slido. We're very grateful for those. We'll work through some of those in a structured way. And then about halfway through the time, we'll switch to a sort of open mic to give you a chance to sort of vocalize any thoughts that are finally on your mind. Ben, I'm going to ask you to keep me honest on timing, please. I'm looking for Chris. Chris, you had a question on wet storage sites, which I think fits better into this. Hello, mate. Thanks for still being here. So your question on wet storage, I think, was a really good one. So let me kick off by just providing you some reflections on that. So I think the first thing to say is that we see this as an issue that sits outside the Round 5 tender. And the key reason for that is that to date, there has been, or still is, significant uncertainty about where the right locations are. Indeed, from the Crown Estate perspective, thinking about seabed leasing, who the counterparties could be, so who would be the owner and operator of the stores. That said, we do acknowledge that it is an extremely important issue, and we are keeping in close touch with a number of the sort of joint industry projects and working groups that are going on, and also through our co-funding and participation in the government's Floating Wind Industrialisation Task Force, so very much on our radar. You will start to hear us be more involved in this. We see this sit alongside activities like the Celtic Sea Blueprint. There was a question on that, and the answer to your question, when will it be published, is well ahead of the ITT phase. And we're just doing some structured one-to-one engagement on our findings in the blueprint, so that we have a kind of shared and kind of clear view on what the Celtic Sea supply chain opportunity is, including the challenges, I think, on wet storage, Chris. And then as we get into our stride on, helping the supply chain accelerate, wet storage will be in our thinking and our acting on that. So hopefully that gives you a view on what is a really important question. So thank you for bringing it up today. I appreciate that. Okay. So I'm joined by the panel who I have had the opportunity to introduce yourself, so to be efficient with time, I'm just going to crack on. And Graham, I'm going to focus on PCS, on the pre-consent surveys first, if I can at the moment. And I think there's a key question here around when the results of the surveys will be shared with bidders. And we've said they'll be shared with successful bidders. And then there's a set of questions here that, which get at the question, so what before the ITT2 stage? So could you address both of those things for us, please, Graham?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So our data sets are ring-fenced for successful bidders, but of course, information is important to you to understand risk profile of seabed conditions. So our intention is to create a technical note for issue later in the year once our summer campaigns are complete and we've completed our initial data interpretation through our specialist contractors.
Good, thank you, Graham. And I think another question here, which I think speaks to the heart of, the quality of the work that you've done and how hard we've worked with stakeholders to make this sort of programme robust. And the question is, can you confirm that the surveys undertaken have received the relevant authority endorsement and will be sufficient to satisfy baseline assessments for the EIA? So perhaps you could speak to that specifically, but more broadly, the work we've been doing with advisors and stakeholders to get the scope right.
Yeah, important point. In designing the surveys and specifications, we appointed our technical advisors, and some of them have a specialist background in environmental works and bird and marine mammal surveys specifically. We've had multiple meetings with statutory nature conservation bodies, and they've advised us on our proposed scopes of works. And indeed, if I can draw your attention to the technical specifications, at the very top of that document, we make reference to two guidance notes, one produced by Natural England and one by Natural Resource Wales, where it's quite clear the expectations of those bodies on what our surveys should involve and undertake. And even through the progression of these works, we do meet with the SNCBs to update them on our progress, and we're working closely with them through time to ensure that we do deliver a reliable and useful product to the developers.
Great, thank you, Graham. I'm just going to switch target now, and I'm going to engage the other Graham on the panel and Maurice as well, and just come back with some questions that we've received on grid. Again, taking a handful of questions together here, I think they're all trying to get at the same thing. So this one, I think, articulates it best. So what if a successful developer doesn't have a holding offer from ESO? Will it be made an offer on the back of an agreement for lease from TCE? And perhaps if I can just ask you to also reflect, there's another question here that says, what happens to the grid queue once projects have won leases? So I wonder if you could just take us through that issue, please.
Sure, I'll do my best to answer that. So if, in order to get to a conclusion on an offer, you need to apply, and then we can respond to that application. Now, if you've already got a holding offer, you've already applied, and that can, if you're successful in the process, then we can readily convert that into a substantive offer. If you haven't yet applied for a connection to the transmission system, then what we'd say is, well, there's still time to do that. It's not an essential part of the Crown Estates process, but it is an essential part of our process. In order to get a grid connection offer, you need to apply, and that will need to happen for you to get there. I mean, a preference would be to have all those in place up front, so we know what the relationships are, we know who we're talking to. But ultimately, that could happen at any point. But if you haven't applied and you're interested, I would suggest at least coming to talk to us. Can you remind me of the second part of the question, please? So
the second part of the question was, I think, what happens to the grid queue once projects have won leases?
Well, I've already explained that what we'd like to do with the process is get to a point where essentially, the successful projects can get a firm connection offer as early as possible in queue terms, if that's the right terminology, and in timing terms. But I thought what we can say just now is there's 4.5 gigawatts of capacity being offered through the lease process, so that means that 4.5 gigawatts of connection offers will be produced. The residual will essentially drop out of the queue and, to a certain extent, create space for other people.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just going to roll on, if I can, for both you and Maurice, because I think this is a key one, and I think you were trying to get at it in your discussion, but perhaps draw out a bit more clarity. So I think the key question is, what clarity will be provided on connection dates, and how will this respect the queue process? But I think it's the connection, what can we say about the visibility of connection dates as we progress through the leasing process?
I think we will be able to give more information on connection dates through the design process. So when we share our recommendations in advance of the ITT, then we can give you a view on reinforcement requirements and timescales. I think ultimately you can only really be definitive on dates and timings when you've got to a point where you know exactly what generation projects need in terms of their own phasing and timing across the piece. And so, and appreciate that's some way off, but inevitably you have to be able to take all those factors into account to finally firm up on timings. But we will share as much as we can along the way in advance of the ITT and also in conversations following on from that.
Great, thank you. Maurice, I think this is something we've discussed actually recently, so you can perhaps provide some insight to this. Still on grid, changing direction a little bit. There's a question here that says, the grid connection and associated costs for these projects is a significant uncertainty. Have you any guidance for developers on how to model these costs? So we were chatting about this a little while ago. I wonder if you've got something you can offer into that question.
Well, I think, again, this is something that we're really benefiting from our relationship with the ESO, and I think actually at the most recent event that you had in November, Graham, I think actually that was an ask of developers, wasn't it, to have better information, as good information as you were using. Could that be shared? And I believe you have already done that anyway since November. So there is information out there that's been provided to the developer community from the ESO directly. So that's probably the way I would answer it, and I imagine that's the way in which we both want to make sure developers are engaged, so that we can be as transparent, as helpful as possible in terms of the cost and other information that can come forward. But I think you, Graham, might be able to point anyone who's interested to where that information actually resides. But it's been made available to developers who attended the November workshop, I understand.
Okay, thank you. And then just to round out on this sort of theme of grid for a second, I think there's a fairly clear answer to this one, so it's worth taking it just quickly. So it says, are future sites, i.e. the 12 gigawatts or up to 12 gigawatts that comes after round 5, being considered as part of the HND process?
It's a good question. I suppose the answer is not directly, in terms of we're not designing for additional capacity. We are limited in what we can legitimately do within the process. There may be cases where, all other things being equal, we can take strategic requirements into account. If you've got a choice between two things which are the same, and where one gives you more options in the future, you'd go for the latter one. But at this point, we're not able to explicitly factor in additional capacity. That's more to come in the future.
All right. Thank you for that.
I'd just add, Tim, that we are, as well as for round 5, the Crown Estate are involved in dialogue with the ESO about the future offshore wind prospects that Johnny talked about earlier, Celtic Sea being a part of that. So we are in dialogue about that actively, but yeah, just so that everyone is aware of that. But clearly, as Graham said, it's the up to 12 gigawatts additional capacity is not part of the HND process that you're taking forward.
That's correct, and of course, in a world where strategic spatial energy planning is in place, connection processes have been reformed, it may be very different. So more to come on that.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Sean, we're going to focus on HRA for a bit, if that's all right. There are a range of questions here, actually, and I like the first one because it's just blunt and upfront, so I'll ask it, but I'm going to add a second bit to it as well. So the first question is, what happens if the plan level HRA check fails? But but there's another follow-up question that says, can you give an example of where the HRA would be invalid? So can you just sort of talk us through, your appreciation of some of those issues?
Yeah, thanks very much, Tim. I suppose in terms of the likelihood of failure or things that would trigger a conformity check fail, we've done a huge amount of work to ensure that the commercial design of our leasing round excludes the majority of controllable factors that would cause that. We can't state categorically right now that nothing will come forwards in the future, and particularly when we look at external factors, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of site conservation status, the state of the environment that we are looking to deploy offshore wind into. As that changes, there is the potential for the need for additional technical consideration. And so in terms of the process by which, if there are challenges identified, and we'll be monitoring these things, so I would hope that there's a very, very short period of time between starting the kind of ITT2 bidding process and the conclusion of the conformity check. So by the time that we enter that bidding process in ITT2, we will have been continuously monitoring. And if there is anything that we believe is likely to cause a challenge in the process, that will be something that we start looking at immediately. We're not just going to wait and wait and wait and then spring a surprise at the end. It has to be a continuous monitoring process. If there is something that would trigger a conformity check fail, that may require us to do some further technical assessment, and depending on the outcome of that technical assessment, we would then either conclude the HRA with no adverse effect, or should adverse effect be identified as a possibility, we may identify further mitigation measures, or if required, we could progress a derogation. So at that stage, all options would remain on the table, and we would not prejudge the outcome of that process. But what I really want to get across is that we won't stay silent, we won't disappear over the next kind of 12 months whilst this process is progressing. We will be continuously monitoring, and where there are potential issues, we'll be flagging those early and seeking to address them before we get to the kind of the key points in time.
Thanks, Sean. And I'm going to just build on that and ask you one last question, but then we'll move to taking questions from the floor. So if colleagues with roving mics could start to be ready, that would be really helpful. So then could you just sort of set expectations about sort of, how much engagement there will be from us, as the tender process rolls forward, and also, how you think we might handle any questions from bidders in relation to the HRA, from now through the tender process forward?
Yeah, thanks very much, Tim. So when we publish the HRA, we will make sure to set out the route by which any clarification questions can be asked. In the period intervening from now through to the end of the tender, it will clearly have to be carefully controlled in order that we have a fair and transparent and open process. But we won't disappear. We will be part of the process, and the HRA team will be part of that process. So we will have opportunities to communicate to you through appropriately set out processes as we identify any potential challenges, or continue to give reassurance that we believe that the conclusions of the HRA remain valid.
Thanks so much, Paul. Thank you. I'm going to take about sort of 5 or so minutes worth of questions from the floor. Are there any? Is there anybody who'd like to ask a question? Ollie, you are as far away from a microphone as it's possible to get, I'm sorry to say.
One question on the survey spread. Once you have mobilized that, it would have been an idea to collect data on the outer rim areas of search to see what is out there that might influence selection of further sites for the 12 gigawatts which have been announced. Has anyone thought about that? Has this been done, or was that too late to change the course of action?
So yeah. Sorry, Graham, I'll share a thought if I may, just and then hand over to you. So it's a great question. I think it speaks to the work that Johnny's doing on future leasing, and as we look at how we evolve our leasing offer and how we bring forward well de-risked sites, then the programme of surveys that we might deliver ahead of future leasing is clearly a thought in that. But Graham, do you want to add something to that?
No, I think you've said it there, Tim. No,
All right.
We're focusing on the current PDAs for now with geophysics and geotechnics.
Great stuff. I'm going to feel like an auctioneer in a moment. I'm going once, going twice. I don't see any other hands going up in the audience. I do. Claire, is that you? Go for it, Claire.
Yeah, just a question to Sean, actually. So Claire Melrose from EDF Renewables. And you mentioned that the plan level HRA isn't yet concluded. Would it be possible to ask what stage it's at, whether it's currently sitting with sort of SNCBs for approval or other?
Shall I just jump in?
Yeah, please do, yeah.
Thanks very much for that. So we are in the process of concluding the HRA. So as I mentioned, the intent is to conclude within next month. So we are in the final stages now of that process and kind of moving towards our governance.
Philippa. Sorry, Richard. Philippa's sitting. Yeah, you've got it.
Hi, Philippa from RWE again. Can Crown Estate confirm that Ofgem has been consulted on the transmission AFL fees, and will they be fully recoverable under the off-tow sale process?
Thank you for the question, Maurice. I'm going to invite you to pick that one up.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks for that question. Yes, in short, we have been in discussion with Ofgem, and so just to be clear, we are introducing a transmission lease rent, different to previous rounds this time for round 5. The reason we're doing that is to try to be more consistent across all different types of transmission assets that are all competing and interested in the same space. So that applies to interconnectors or bootstraps or anything like that that could be looking for routes and landfalls in a similar region. So yes, in that regard, we've had dialogue with Ofgem. You can imagine they have concerns about any additional costs on consumers' bills. We've tried to provide them with evidence to suggest that is actually the impact of leasing rent is minimal, really minimal in terms of consumer impact. But yeah, in short, we have an engagement with Ofgem about this.
Thank you, Maurice. Good. I'm going to draw it to a close there, so thank you for your questions. Let me thank the panel on your behalf and just close by saying that I'm mindful as a famous resident of Swansea who had some advice, and I'm going to ask you to not follow his advice, so do go gently into that good night, please. But as we say goodbye, I'm going to hand over to Gus to bring the day to a close. But thank you so much for your attention today.
Thank you very much. You'll be pleased to know I'm not going to make a big, long speech. I'm just going to very quickly wrap us up. Firstly, just to say a huge thank you to all of the team, both my team, but also those who've joined us from various different organisations as well. And a thank you to you. We've covered a lot of ground today. I'm conscious there's been quite a hectic schedule during this day, but that's because there's a lot of work that's gone into this, but also a lot of opportunity. And I hope that you leave here taking some of those key messages that have come, messages about clear alignment both in local, in Welsh government, but also in Westminster government, across the political divide of support for the UK's offer here. Alignment across key bodies, such as you heard, from the UKIB, from ESO, working with us as well. Also a lot of opportunity in terms of how we have designed this to de-risk developments as well, and how we want to bring a very positive market offer for all of you to consider. So I joked at the beginning, this was the first time I've seen my team in an offshore wind setting with ties on. Now is the moment to take the ties off and to roll the sleeves up, because the hard work really starts. But that hard work is now over to you, and we look forward to working with you as you prepare your approaches to this tender as we go forward. But thank you again for your time, for your interest, and we look forward to capitalising on this incredible opportunity, both for the region, for the UK, and most importantly, for future generations as we turn our electricity system green for the future. Thank you very much.